Hello, my name is Annelies. I'm a researcher in the field of deaf studies. Amongst the many topics I have looked at, an area of focus of mine has been deaf space. This research has been looking at a variety of deaf spaces and what happens within them. I'd like to share two examples with you. The first was on a trip I took some time ago to Ghana, Africa. There is a village there that has a high population of deaf people. They have evolved their own sign language within that village. There are no deaf organizations, deaf clubs, or deaf schools in that village. So deaf people and hearing people there are interacting freely every day. Something that has been noticed there is the establishment of deaf spaces. For example, in the homes of deaf people, many would visit, and eventually over time, that space would become a deaf space. Another example is deaf people walking to another place, and when they meet with other deaf people, they sit or stand in that space, catching up, sharing new information, and that particular space becomes a deaf space. The second example comes from the city of Mumbai, also known as Bombay, in India. It was noted that deaf people were commuting to and from work daily by train. The trains have specified carriages, including general carriages, carriages for women, and a smaller section for people with a disability. It was in this section that deaf people would sit for their daily commute and meet. They would chat, share information, exchange news about deaf events, so it became a fortunate and significant commute and grew into a deaf space. So, deaf spaces can be deaf organizations, deaf clubs, or deaf schools, or in fact, in any space that deaf people come together to meet. Deaf spaces can also emerge in online places, including WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, or Instagram. These can be rightly viewed as deaf spaces. Deaf spaces can also be transient, emerging and then disappearing. But deaf spaces can emerge in multiple places with interconnections. And this is because deaf people have their own networks. Consider this image. This image depicts a complex, interconnected network of people and spaces. There are nodes that could be places, organizations, buildings, or even events. And these places form nodes where people can meet, exchange information, make introductions, and communicate. Once people leave these spaces, they may go to other nodes. It doesn't mean that these places are then disconnected or the ties are severed. They remain connected. So when people meet in a space, this builds the network and creates a more complex, growing network. So, deaf spaces are vital for helping to perpetuate the deaf network. Deaf spaces have changed dramatically over time. There have always been deaf spaces where deaf people have met physically. However, this idea of a deaf space being connected to a physical building has changed. Deaf owned buildings are now disappearing, and deaf schools and deaf clubs are sadly closing down. It seems deaf spaces are more connected to events and deaf people making contact with each other via friendship groups and through different communication platforms. Deaf spaces seem to be more transient in nature, and this means they tend to be more fragile. This is something we need to look at for the future to ensure that deaf spaces keep thriving and keep appearing.